Every time you call something a disaster, you are blaming the stars. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. The word itself, baked into its DNA, is an accusation aimed at the sky. And today we are going to find out exactly how that happened. To understand why disaster means what it means, you have to put yourself in 16th century Europe. Not the Europe of telescopes and orbital mechanics, but the Europe of astrologers advising kings, of celestial charts hung in royal courts, of physicians who would not perform surgery unless the stars were properly aligned. This was a world where the sky was not a backdrop. It was a governing document. The position of Saturn at your birth could explain your melancholy. A comet overhead could explain a plague. And if a flood wiped out your village or a battle went catastrophically wrong, or a ship sank in a storm, the explanation was not randomness. The explanation was up there, written in fire. This is the cultural soil that produced our word, a world where the stars did not merely correlate with catastrophe, they caused it. And if the stars caused it, and the stars were bad, then you had encountered what Italian speakers were beginning to call a disastro. Origin story. The word disaster enters the English language in the 1590s. Its earliest recorded use dates to around that period, though the word itself was already circulating in French and Italian well before English writers got hold of it. The French form, désastre, appears around 1560, but the French got it from Italian, and the Italian form is where the real etymology lives. Disastro. Break that word apart, and you have everything you need. Dis, a prefix indicating something negative or unfavorable, functioning here the way mis functions in English words like misfortune or mischance, and astro, meaning star or planet, which comes directly from the Latin astrum, which itself comes from the Greek astron. That Greek root, astron, connects to the Proto-Indo-European root ster, one of the oldest reconstructed roots in the language family, and it is the ancestor of our word star in English, stern in German, and dozens of other forms across European languages. This is a word family with roots so deep they predate writing. Now, the Italian astro was not abstract. In 1560s usage, it carried full astrological weight. Your astro was your star, your ruling planet, the celestial body under whose influence you were born or were living. A good astro meant favorable conditions. A bad one, signaled by dis, meant calamity was coming. Consider the historical moment. In 1556, one of the deadliest earthquakes in recorded history struck Shaanxi province in China, killing hundreds of thousands. Word of such events, traveling slowly across trade routes, reinforced for European thinkers the idea that catastrophe operated on a cosmic scale. Closer to home, the Italian peninsula in the 1500s was a theater of war, plague, and political collapse. The sack of Rome in 1527 had traumatized a generation. Writers and scholars looking for language to describe overwhelming, sudden ruin reached for a frame they already had. The stars had turned against them. The word moved from Italian into French with very little transformation. French writers in the 1560s used désastre to describe military catastrophe and natural calamity, always with that undertone of celestial ill will. When English writers absorbed it in the 1590s, the astrological meaning was still present, but starting to soften. By the time William Shakespeare was writing in the early 1600s, disaster was already becoming a word you could use for any large misfortune, not just one you were specifically blaming on a bad horoscope. The shift is gradual, but telling. The word outlived the belief system that created it. The misconception. Here is where people get confused. The common assumption is that dis in disaster comes from Latin meaning bad or away from, and that it simply pairs with astrum to create a poetic metaphor. Bad star equals disaster. Simple enough. But that reading misses the functional reality of how this word was built and used. The prefix dis here is not decorative. It is doing the same job it does in disgrace or dishonor. It is not describing the star as bad. It is marking the whole situation as ruined, as ill-starred, as operating under hostile celestial conditions. The star itself is the cause. You are not calling the star bad. You are saying that because the stars are against you, everything is falling apart. More importantly, this was not metaphor to the people who coined it. When Italian speakers in the 1500s said disastro, they were not reaching for a colorful figure of speech. They were giving a causal explanation. Pre-scientific cultures across Europe genuinely attributed catastrophe to malevolent or unfavorable star alignments. Astrology was not decoration, it was infrastructure. It was woven into medicine, navigation, agriculture, and warfare. What we have inherited is a piece of that infrastructure, repurposed. The mechanism it described has been discarded. The word has stayed. Modern echoes, the astrological ancestry of disaster, is not just a historical footnote. It surfaces in places you might not expect. When news anchors say a hurricane is an unmitigated disaster, they are using a word whose original meaning assigned agency to the heavens. When disaster relief organizations use the word in their official names and mandates, they are inheriting a 500-year-old Italian framing that blamed cosmic misalignment. The bureaucratic neutrality of the word today hides a surprisingly fatalistic origin. Even the insurance industry term act of God maps loosely onto the same conceptual territory. Something came from outside human control and destroyed what you built. The old version said the stars did it. The legal version attributes it to God. The emotional version just calls it a disaster and keeps moving. In Italian today, disastro is still used, still meaning catastrophe or disaster, and the word has not drifted far from its origin. The chain from Greek to Latin to Italian to French to English is intact and still in daily use across multiple living languages. Deeper connections. The star root that built disaster did not stop there. Astronomy and astrology share the same Greek astron. An astronaut is literally a star sailor. Asterisk, that small star-shaped punctuation mark, carries the Greek aster directly. The flower, aster, is named for its star-shaped bloom. Stellar, meaning relating to stars, or meaning excellent, depending on context, comes from the same Latin astrum. So does constellation, which gives you con meaning together and stella meaning star. A constellation is literally stars gathered together. Influenza follows a parallel track worth mentioning here. That word comes from Italian influenza, meaning influence, specifically the influence of the stars on human health. Medieval Italians who got sick during a particular celestial configuration called the illness the influenza of the stars. We kept the word. We let the explanation go. What these words share is a moment in history when the sky felt like it was in charge. When human beings looked at suffering, disease, war, and natural catastrophe and said, reasonably given what they knew, that forces larger than themselves were responsible. They built that belief into their language. And then the belief changed. The language did not. That is what etymology keeps showing us over and over. Words are not just sounds with meanings attached. They are compressed history. They carry the assumptions, fears, and cosmologies of the people who needed them. When you call something a disaster today, you are reaching across 5 centuries.